The golden glow of the chandeliers bathed Lumiere in an air of exclusivity. The clinking of fine crystal, the murmured conversations of Beverly Hills elite, and the slow, deliberate movements of impeccably dressed waitstaff created an atmosphere of controlled sophistication. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Only the right kind of people belonged here. Ashley, one of Lumiere's most senior waitresses, thrived in this environment. With her tailored uniform perfectly pressed and her blonde hair swept into an immaculate bun, she carried herself like royalty. She wasn't just serving food, she was curating an experience. She had developed a keen ability to assess guests within seconds. The rich, the powerful, the worthy, they were welcomed with practiced charm. The others, well, they received something less. The restaurant doors swung open, and a man entered. His steps were unhurried, his posture relaxed, his clothes ordinary. Faded jeans, a slightly wrinkled shirt, a jacket that was comfortable but carried no designer label. He moved through the room as if he didn't realize where he was. Ashley barely concealed her disdain. She exchanged a glance with another hostess, her lips twitching into a smirk. What is he doing here? She didn't recognize him, nor did she care to. To her, he was just another nobody wandering into a place he clearly couldn't afford. She placed a hand on her hip and strolled over, her polished heels clicking against the marble floor. "Good evening," she said, her tone polite but ice-cold. "Can I help you?" The man Keanu Reeves smiled gently, as if oblivious to the condescension dripping from her words. "I'd like a table, please." Ashley's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. She tilted her head, allowing herself the luxury of a slow, assessing glance from his boots to his face, making sure he felt the weight of her judgment. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice carrying a lilt of amusement loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "This is a very exclusive restaurant." She expected hesitation, an awkward fumble for an excuse, a sheepish retreat toward the door. But Keanu remained unfazed. His smile didn't waver. "Yes, this is the place." Ashley let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "All right," she said, turning on her heel. "Let's see how long this lasts." She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her night. Ashley led Keanu through the lavish dining room with swift, mechanical steps, making no effort to hide her impatience. The soft golden glow of the chandeliers illuminated the high-profile guests seated in the center of the room, men in tailored suits, women draped in designer gowns, their laughter floating through the air like champagne bubbles. These were the people Lumiere was meant for. And then there was him. Ashley barely bothered to glance over her shoulder as she guided him not to one of the desirable tables where the city's elite dined, but to the farthest, dimmest corner of the restaurant. A place where the glow of luxury barely reached, where the constant clatter of dishes from the kitchen broke the restaurant's serene ambience. It was the kind of table given to guests who were an afterthought, or worse, an inconvenience. She stopped abruptly, dropped the menu onto the table with a careless thud, and crossed her arms. "Here you go," she said, her tone syrupy sweet yet dripping with condescension. "This table should be perfect for you. It's a bit quieter." Keanu glanced at the table, then at Ashley, his expression unreadable. If he was offended, he didn't show it. Instead, he simply nodded, his slight smile never wavering. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm, controlled. Ashley narrowed her eyes, irritated by his composure. Does he not realize what's happening? She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Just so you know," she added with a smirk, "our clientele usually has a certain standard, but since we happen to have a free table tonight, well, lucky you." The meaning behind her words was clear. He wasn't supposed to be here. He didn't belong. Keanu didn't flinch. "I appreciate the accommodation," he said smoothly, pulling out the chair and settling in, as if he had been given the finest seat in the house. Ashley scoffed quietly. Unbelievable. As she turned to walk away, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for a nearby couple to hear, He won't last 5 minutes here." But as she disappeared into the dining room, Keanu simply opened the menu, leisurely scanning the options. If Ashley thought she had put him in his place, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Ashley strutted away, confident that the man she had so effortlessly dismissed would soon come to his senses. She imagined it vividly, him awkwardly skimming the menu, realizing the prices were far beyond his reach and slipping out before anyone noticed. People like him always do. But as she cast a casual glance back at his table, she frowned. Keanu wasn't shifting uncomfortably, he wasn't hurriedly checking his wallet or sneaking glances at the exit. Instead, he sat with quiet ease, calmly browsing the menu as if he had all the time in the world. Unbothered, unshaken, completely unfazed by the pointed humiliation she had tried to orchestrate. Ashley's irritation flared. Why isn't he reacting? Determined to remind him of his place, she made a show of attending to the other guests first. She lingered at the tables of well-dressed patrons, laughing a little too loudly at their jokes, gracefully pouring wine, ensuring that every bit of her energy went into reinforcing the exclusivity of their experience. Keanu, however, remained an anomaly. He simply waited. His posture was relaxed, his gaze occasionally drifting across the dining room, not in desperation but in quiet observation. The restaurant's opulence, the flickering candlelight on each table, the soft hum of the pianist playing in the background. He seemed to be taking it all in with genuine appreciation. The subtlety of his demeanor did not go unnoticed. From a table nearby, an elderly gentleman in a navy blue suit had been watching the scene unfold. He swirled the wine in his glass thoughtfully, his eyes flicking between Ashley, who had been so quick to judge, and the man who remained unshaken by it all. Finally, Ashley made her way back to Keanu's table. With an exaggerated sigh, she pulled out her notepad, barely masking her boredom. "Have you decided what you'd like?" she asked, her tone deliberately dismissive. Keanu looked up, his expression still unreadable, and pointed to one of the finest dishes on the menu. "I'd like to try this one." Ashley blinked. Then, with a mocking tilt of her head, she let out a short, dry laugh. "Oh, of course, the filet de Rossini," she crossed her arms. "Just so we're clear, sir, that's $350. Are you sure that's what you want?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Yes," he replied, his tone as steady as ever. "It sounds wonderful." Ashley narrowed her eyes, waiting for the moment of doubt to creep onto his face. It never came. Instead, he handed her the menu, still wearing that same calm, unreadable smile. And for the first time that evening, Ashley felt a flicker of unease. Ashley snatched the menu from Keanu's hands, her nails pressing into the leather cover just a little too tightly. She had spent years perfecting the art of making unwanted guests uncomfortable, turning polite dismissiveness into an unspoken, "You don't belong here." And yet, no matter how much she tried to make this man squirm, he refused to take the bait. Keanu sat with the same unshakable calm, as if he were completely oblivious to her barely concealed disdain. Or worse, as if he knew exactly what she was doing and had simply chosen not to acknowledge it. "He's playing a game with me," she thought bitterly. Fine, she'd just have to raise the stakes. Instead of taking his order to the kitchen immediately, Ashley made a point to prioritize everyone else first. She spent extra time at each table, smiling warmly at well-dressed guests, laughing at their idle conversations, pouring drinks with deliberate care, all while making sure Keanu saw it. Minutes passed, then more, and still Keanu didn't call for her. He didn't wave her down, didn't shift impatiently in his seat. He simply sat there, watching the restaurant's ambience with a quiet, almost amused detachment. The other patrons, however, were not as indifferent. The elderly gentleman from earlier watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable, but his fingers tapping against the rim of his wineglass. A younger couple seated a few tables away whispered among themselves, exchanging knowing glances as they noticed the deliberate neglect. Even the bartender, busy fixing drinks, stole glances in Keanu's direction, his brows furrowing at the obvious mistreatment. Ashley finally returned, dropping a glass of water onto Keanu's table with an audible clink. "Here," she said curtly. "And just so we're clear, the minimum tip here is 20%. Wouldn't want any surprises when the check arrives." Still, Keanu didn't react the way she wanted. Instead, he simply nodded, lifting the glass of water with a quiet thank you before taking a slow sip. Ashley clenched her jaw. Why won't he just break already? Determined to push him further, she leaned in slightly. "I have to say, it's rare to see someone like you ordering something like this," she said, her voice dripping with feigned curiosity. "Are you sure you'll appreciate it? Our chef prefers serving this dish to guests who understand fine dining." Keanu set his glass down, tilting his head slightly. "Oh?" Ashley crossed her arms. "It's just that, well, some people order these expensive dishes without really knowing what they're getting into." She smirked. "I'd hate for you to waste your money." Keanu studied her for a moment. Then, slowly, his smile widened, not out of amusement but something else entirely. Something knowing. "I appreciate your concern," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "but I assure you, I know exactly what I'm paying for." The words hung in the air, heavier than Ashley had expected. For the first time that night, she felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up her spine. Was he testing me? Before she could say anything else, a new voice interrupted. "Excuse me, young man." Ashley turned sharply. The elderly gentleman in the navy mule suit had risen from his table and now stood beside Keanu, offering a kind yet firm smile. "I just wanted to say, it's refreshing to see someone with such patience." He glanced briefly at Ashley before returning his attention to Keanu. "It takes a great deal of grace to remain unshaken in situations like this." Keanu met the man's gaze, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," he said simply. Ashley, however, felt her stomach twist. The man's words hadn't been directed at Keanu. They had been about her. The dining room, once filled with idle conversation, had quieted slightly. More guests were watching now. Ashley quickly straightened, smoothing down her uniform as if that could erase the subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Sir? The elderly man held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Don't worry, dear," he said. "I'm sure you have many guests to attend to." Ashley's face burned. The warning in his tone was clear. And for the first time that evening, she realized she wasn't in control of this situation anymore. Ashley forced a stiff smile, her pride bruised from the elderly gentleman's remark. She had spent years controlling the atmosphere at Lumiere, deciding who belonged and who didn't. But now, for the first time, the tide was shifting. The quiet murmur of the other guests, the subtle glances being exchanged. It was all slipping from her grasp. Still, she wasn't about to back down. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heels and marched back toward the kitchen, gripping Keanu's order slip a little too tightly. Fine, let him sit there and act like he belongs. He'll regret it soon enough. But instead of immediately delivering his order to the chefs, she delayed. She prioritized a VIP's cocktail request, then stopped to chat with an elegant couple in the center of the dining room, laughing just a little too loudly at a joke she barely heard. Every move was calculated, every second another reminder that he wasn't important enough to be a priority. Keanu, however, remained the picture of patience. He simply waited, his expression unreadable. The elderly gentleman who had spoken earlier observed silently from his table, his lips pursed as if considering whether to intervene again. More time passed. Ashley finally strolled back toward Keanu's table, this time carrying his plate. But before she placed it in front of him, she hesitated. Just long enough to make it clear that this was a favor, not a service. With a small smirk, she set the dish down with a deliberate thud. "There you go," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hope it meets your expectations. And of course, if it doesn't, we do have some more affordable options available. A small ripple of murmurs ran through the nearby tables. The passive-aggressive insult was unmistakable. Keanu, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he picked up his fork, carefully sliced into the dish, and took his first bite. He chewed slowly as if savoring every flavor, then placed the fork down gently and looked up at Ashley. "It's excellent," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "Please give my compliments to the chef." Ashley blinked. That wasn't the response she had expected. Before she could think of something to say, a new voice, sharper this time, cut through the tension. "Ashley." She froze. It wasn't a guest this time. It was her manager. He stood at the edge of the dining room, his arms crossed, his eyes locked onto her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. And suddenly she knew. Something was very wrong. The air in the restaurant felt heavier, the conversations quieter. Guests glanced between Keanu, Ashley, and the manager, sensing that whatever was happening was about to escalate. Ashley swallowed hard, forcing another smile. "Yes, sir?" The manager's expression didn't change. "Step into my office," he said firmly, "now." A hush fell over the dining room. And for the first time that evening, Ashley wasn't the one in control. Ashley's breath hitched in her throat. The moment the manager uttered those words, the once glamorous dining room transformed into a suffocating spotlight. All eyes were on her. The hum of conversation dimmed, forks clinked against plates, and waitstaff froze mid-step. It was as if the entire restaurant had collectively leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. Ashley swallowed hard, glancing at Keanu, who still sat perfectly at ease. He met her gaze with a calm expression, the hint of a knowing smile playing on his lips. It wasn't smug. It wasn't mocking. It was almost expectant. The realization sent a fresh wave of irritation through her, but before she could say anything, the manager's voice sliced through the air again. "Ashley, my office, now." Heat burned at the back of her neck. With every step toward the manager, the weight of the situation pressed heavier on her shoulders. She straightened her posture, desperate to maintain some semblance of dignity. "This is just a misunderstanding. I can explain. I can fix this." The walk to the back of the restaurant felt like an eternity. The polished floors, once a symbol of her control over this space, now seemed to reflect her growing unease. As the office door closed behind them, the murmurs of the dining room faded into a heavy silence. The manager, a middle-aged man known for his calm but ruthless authority, turned to face her. His eyes, sharp, dissecting, weren't just filled with disappointment. They held something worse. Recognition. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Ashley forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle. Sir, I was just ensuring that our clientele remains..." The single word shattered any defense she had left. The manager sighed, rubbing his temples before locking eyes with her. "Do you know who that man is?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that made her stomach tighten. Ashley hesitated. Sure, she had assumed he was just another outsider trying to play wealthy for a night, but something about the way the guests had reacted, the way the manager was reacting, was making her doubt. The manager let out a humorless chuckle. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Then, with the kind of deliberate slowness that made her pulse spike, he leaned forward. "Ashley," he said, enunciating every word. "Keanu Reeves is one of the owners of this restaurant." The floor might as well have collapsed beneath her feet. Her breath hitched, her skin turned ice cold, and a strange ringing filled her ears. No, that couldn't be right. Her lips parted, but no words came. The manager studied her, unimpressed. "I don't know what possessed you to treat any customer the way you did tonight, but you just humiliated the man who signs your paychecks in front of half of Beverly Hills." Ashley's mind spun, desperate for a way out, but there was none. Every snide remark, every delay, every humiliating gesture, she had done it all to him. A billionaire, a Hollywood legend, her boss. The horror of it washed over her in waves. The manager sighed, shaking his head. "You're lucky if all you walk away with tonight is your job." Ashley swallowed hard, her once unshakable confidence obliterated. The door to the office remained closed, but she could still feel the weight of the eyes waiting outside, ready to see how this disaster would unfold. She had spent the evening trying to put Keanu Reeves in his place, and now she realized she was the one who didn't belong here. Ashley stood frozen, her mind scrambling for a way to salvage the situation, but there was no escape. The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She had spent the evening trying to belittle a man she assumed was beneath the standards of Lumiere, and now the truth had shattered every illusion she had. Keanu Reeves wasn't just another guest. He was one of the owners of the restaurant. The manager watched her, arms crossed, disappointment etched into every line of his face. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ashley licked her lips, trying to find words, any words, but her usual sharp tongue had abandoned her. I didn't know," she finally stammered. "If I had—" The manager held up a hand, silencing her. "That's the problem. You didn't think to treat him with respect until you knew who he was." Ashley flinched. She had prided herself on understanding Lumiere's clientele, on deciding who deserved attention and who didn't. But tonight, she had made the gravest mistake of all. She had assumed. And now the entire restaurant knew it. From beyond the office door, the murmur of voices in the dining room was still present. She could feel their eyes, their judgment. She had spent the night making Keanu feel unwelcome. Now she was the one who felt like she didn't belong. The manager exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Go back out there," he ordered. "Apologize, and pray that he's more forgiving than you were." Ashley hesitated. The thought of stepping back into that dining room, of facing Keanu and the guests who had witnessed everything, made her stomach twist. But she had no choice. With a deep breath, she nodded and turned toward the door, her hands trembling at her sides. As she stepped back into the dining room, the air felt heavier. Conversations had resumed, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The people who had seen her sneers and heard her condescension were now waiting to see what she would do next. Keanu was still seated at his table, calmly sipping his water, his posture as relaxed as ever. But when he looked up, his eyes met hers with quiet expectancy. Ashley swallowed her pride, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Reeves, I owe you an apology." The story of Ashley and Keanu Reeves serves as a powerful reminder that true class is not determined by wealth or appearance, but by how we treat others. Here are some key lessons we can apply to our own lives. Never judge a book by its cover. Ashley assumed Keanu was unworthy of respect based on his appearance, but she couldn't have been more wrong. This applies to everyday life, whether at work, in public, or in personal relationships. We should never underestimate or mistreat someone based on assumptions. Everyone deserves basic respect, regardless of their background. Your character is defined by how you treat people who can do nothing for you. True kindness isn't about impressing people of status. It's about treating everyone with the same level of dignity. Keanu remained composed and patient, proving that self-respect and humility are far more powerful than arrogance. How you treat those who seem to have no power over you speaks volumes about your integrity. Arrogance can be your downfall. Ashley believed she was in control, but her arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. This serves as a warning that pride and condescension can lead to humiliation, while humility and openness lead to growth. Respect is earned, not demanded. The best way to gain respect from others is to show it first. Keanu didn't need to assert his power. His actions spoke louder than words. If you want to be respected in life, lead with grace, patience, and quiet confidence. The importance of self-awareness. If Ashley had taken a moment to reflect on her actions, she might have avoided embarrassment. Being self-aware helps us recognize when we're making a mistake and adjust before it's too late. Always take a step back and ask, am I treating this person fairly? At the end of the day, respect, humility, and kindness never go out of style. The way you treat others will always come back to you, whether as an opportunity or a lesson. Choose wisely.